In this video, I'm going to show how you can deploy a production-ready Keycloak server. So here, what you can see on my screen is a Docker Compose file that contains configuration for our Keycloak container, and the Keycloak container is backed by Postgres DB, which is also a Docker container, and the Keycloak server is going to be fronted by Keycloak NGINX container. So in this case, the NGINX is our reverse proxy, also known as the load balancer. So here what we want to do is we have a command here that starts the container, that start dev. So this project initially was for starting a dev setup. So I'll just delete this part and just have a start. And this will start the Keycloak server or container in production mode. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've done that, and I have a script here that runs it. Okay, that completed successfully. Okay, let me go ahead and navigate to the Keycloak admin console in the browser. But before I do that, let me explain a few things. So I am going to navigate to the admin URL, which is this HTTPS localhost 8443, which note it's similar to this hostname URL. But what this is doing is that, remember, I have an NGINX reverse proxy. So when I hit this URL, since it's mapped to localhost 8443, it's going to map to this Keycloak NGINX containers 8443, which maps to the internal NGINX port of 443. So this is what's going to happen. So the request first is going to hit the NGINX reverse proxy, so 8443, which will map to 443. Remember, this is running all in a Docker network. And then from 443, if we come to the NGINX configuration, we see it listens here on SSL, and already have the certificates configured. These are the certificates for SSL. And then from there, it's going to direct that request to the Keycloak server itself, which, as you can see here, is configured to Keycloak _ demo port 8080. And this Keycloak _ demo is the name of the Docker service. Since we're running in a Docker network, I can't put localhost here because this is a Docker network. I have to put the service name. And this matches the name of the service up here. And Docker, the container, runs on port 8080. Sorry, the Keycloak Docker container runs on port 8080 in a Docker network. So that's how we see here. I mentioned port 8080. So this setup assumes that your Keycloak servers are in a private network, because if you notice here, we're hitting port 8080, which is not secure. So what is happening is that we're terminating the TLS on NGINX. So NGINX is on 8443, but then from NGINX to Keycloak, that communication is on HTTP because it's going through port 8080. So this setup assumes that your Keycloak servers or your Keycloak cluster is in a private network, and that way that communication is not susceptible to outside bad actors. Now let's navigate to the Keycloak admin console in a browser. Note we're using HTTPS, so we'll navigate to localhost 8443. This message is showing up because I use a self-signed certificate for TLS. So just ignore this so I can visit the website. All right, so here I am. Log in. And boom, I'm in. And this is now running on the production mode for the Keycloak Docker container. So this video covered a couple of things that you need to do if you intend to launch your Keycloak servers or cluster to production. And I'm going to go over them in summary. So one, you want TLS for secure communication. As you notice, I had my TLS configured here through my certificates, but in production, you want to use an actual official certificate authority. I use a self-signed certificate here because I'm doing this locally, but in production, I want to emphasize that you want to use an official certificate authority, not a self-signed certificate. Next, you want to configure this host name for the Keycloak server. So the hostname URL is the URL of the Keycloak server itself. In this case, mine is localhost 8443 because I'm running locally, but this would be your actual domain name and the port. Also, you want to configure a reverse proxy, which is what I had here, NGINX, which is a load balancer. So typically in a production environment, you're not going to be running one node. You're probably going to be running multiple nodes. And for you to send requests to each of the nodes, you want to have a load balancer or reverse proxy that's going to handle delegating those requests to those nodes in your cluster. And then also, you want to have a production grade database. So here I'm using Postgres. By default, Keycloak is going to use H2, which is just like a in-memory database, and also has like a file database as well. But that is not suitable for production. That is just good if you want to test it locally. But even then, if you're using Docker, you might as well just use a Postgres database to test locally, and then in production, just use the actual Postgres database. So those are a few of the things you want to do. Now, in the next video, I'm going to show how you can do or configure your distributed caching, because caching is another aspect of Keycloak that you want to configure correctly when you're going to production.